Hi, friends. It's Doug Reeves, and I'm very pleased to introduce uh, Miss Janelle because she is an extraordinary person precisely at the time when our country needs it. You've probably already seen the national data that the level of stress, anxiety, depression has tripled in the last few years. And there's nobody better equipped to help our students and our colleagues understand the need for um, the need for uh, coaching and support. Uh, Miss Messi has an extraordinary background. In addition to being a counselor and somebody who supports the mental health of our youth, she has also been an extraordinary coach. And if ever our country needed a coach right now, like Miss Massey, it's right now. So I am just delighted beyond belief to introduce my colleague and my friend, Miss Janelle, and Janelle, and I hope you'll consider if you'll allow me to call you Coach Massey.
Absolutely. I still have players that call me coach. So yes, thank you for that lovely introduction. I am excited about the hour that we are going to share together, and I'd like to jump right on into it. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to follow along. And I hope you have your notes ready, because I've got lots of information that I think will help us. As Dr. Reeves said, with all of the stress and anxiety that's going on. So the title of this webinar is Psychological Safety Beyond the Classroom, Exercising Empathy and Emotional Agility as District and Support Staff. And so we have one objective today, and it's layered, but it's just one. And that is that we have at least 4 things that we walk away with that's going to improve our emotional agility and also improve our expression of empathy with others, especially in the midst of chaos. So that is our objective for today as we move forward. So psychological safety, that is a very trending word, but it's not new. Schools have always known that we function and deliver services and education well when we are working and operating in a psychological safe space. And so it is a trusted space where calculated risk-taking and vulnerability is not only encouraged, but it's rewarded. And so when we reward people for having the courage to say, I don't understand, I made a mistake, I'm not going to meet that deadline, that is the type of psychological safety that we are talking about. It is not a place where we can acknowledge that we made a mistake and then in response be punished for it, or put us in a place where we are paralyzed. You'll see the picture to the right. That's of me 20 plus years ago. I was a Division I basketball player at Xavier University a long time ago. But that was the arena that I learned very quickly about the importance of psychological safety. And it wasn't the most positive way of learning about making mistakes and having the room to learn. And a little bit about that situation. I was recruited by one coach, and right before I got to campus, I inherited another coach who had a different philosophy and had a different message towards me and my growth at Xavier. And so the coach that recruited me said, listen, we understand where you need to improve. That left hand is very weak. We know that you have not been playing long, and we believe in your growth, in your potential, and we're going to be there with you during that growth. I didn't get to play under that coach. So the coach coming in was a little less patient and did not provide the psychological safety that I needed in order to grow and thrive. And so I'm asking you today, as we go through this, what arenas have shaped your thoughts about psychological safety? What arenas have shaped your ideas about making mistakes? Was it detrimental to you when you made a mistake? And so that's the thing that we're going to be looking at. I tell you what, being in a practice and being removed from a drill because you made a mistake, an arena where you were supposed to be learning and figuring things out, does a number on how you later on work in the workforce. And so I had a mentor that said to me, Janelle, you have all these great ideas about school-based programming as a school counselor, and the schools never get to see them. You
Yes.
have paralysis by analysis. And I thought, gosh, I know that this is good work. I'm very creative. This is a good program. What am I so anxious about? What am I analyzing? And it went back to me on the basketball court. Will I be criticized? Will there be backlash? Will it be enough? Rather than getting out there and trying. So, what has shaped our thoughts about psychological safety oftentimes puts us where we are right now. So, one of the cornerstones that I want to talk about, two things: emotional agility and empathy.
Mm.
And so, I want to ask you, how agile, emotionally agile, and flexible are you with your emotions in cultivating, encouraging, and maintaining this psychological safe place that we're talking about in your workplace, in your
Right.
office, in your building, in your district? Think about that. I want you to be honest with yourself. How agile and flexible are you with your emotions? And the more flexible and agile you are, the more emotional agility you are. And that's the goal here. So Dr. Susan David wrote a book that's entitled Emotional Agility. She's done tons of research about it. And she's a firm believer in three things: to be present, be aware, and you'll hear this all the time: be curious. Every thought leader that I've ever known that's excellent what they're doing always talks about being curious. And so if we want to increase our emotional agility, we need to know more than that. We're frustrated, we're angry, we're upset. We need to know, what is the feeling behind that? I am angry because I feel absolutely disrespected, or I feel left out or isolated. I feel, bamboozled or manipulated in this situation. We need to be present with what's going on and aware of how we're feeling underneath. So we need to be able to dig deep and be curious about that, investigate, what is it more than just anger? The thing about emotional agility that we need to understand is the science behind it, the physiology behind it. Now, whenever I present, I always try to squeeze in the hand model of the brain. And usually when I do a survey of how many adults have seen this hand model, it's always less than children. And I'm going to tell you right now, both adults and children need to know about the hand model of the brain. And it's really neat because now we can talk to kids and they can explain to us about their nervous system and their stress response. And they can let us know that they flipped their lid and they've used their hand to tell us that I am in the lower downstairs of my brain right now and not the upstairs. And so in the model on the right-hand side of that diagram, it tells you, we look at the risk and we say, this is the spinal cord, this is the brain stem around the paw, and this is the limbic system that houses the amygdala and the hippocampus. And I always tell my young kids, and when I've done this in staff meetings, this is the lizard brain. And we don't have any lizards present. We have full human beings. And the reason why they call this the lizard brain is because the lizard, interesting enough, just has the amygdala and the hippocampus. And so that's why they're so skittish and they're always on high alert. And so for human beings, we have the prefrontal cortex that sits over the amygdala and the stress response alarm system and our emotional control system. And so we wanted to be able to communicate and integrate with the amygdala. The prefrontal cortex is about high functioning decision making. And so we want to be able to say, oh goodness, what's going on? Let's face the facts. We want to be able to create space between how we're feeling and calm down that stress response. Remember, the response is sending out cortisol and adrenaline, and it's saying, come on, fire up, get your blood working, because we've got to run, we've got to flight or fight. And so what we want to happen is to be able to calm that down so that the prefrontal cortex goes up right above that, and it is in control. It is communicating with our emotions. And so when I walk outside and I see a little black and white animal and I'm frozen because I'm thinking I'm about to get sprayed, this is a skunk, I don't know what to do. As that animal comes closer, my prefrontal cortex says, wait a minute, that looks like, oh, that's a cat, it just meowed. And so that's what we need to happen. We need to be able to slow ourselves down so that we can be emotional agile, to be able to say, what are the facts? And let's get that lid right where it needs to be and no longer flip. We know based on the trauma research that when, especially our kids, have overactive flipping the lid constantly in the face of skunks and bears, that they have a hard time integrating those two things. Parents too. And I think sometimes we leave out the adults that we're working with and the adults that we're serving. We have to be mindful of that when trying to establish relationships with folks and de-escalate them. So you don't have to act the way you feel. For those folks who are not on board with mindfulness and the kumbaya train, I'm telling you right now, there's so much research about meditation and mindfulness, the practice of slowing breaths down and heart rate down so that we can get our thinking brain in control. So the other things that I've kind of intertwined into emotional agility, I read a lot of sports related writers. And because I work with a lot of athletes, high school and college athletes in the mental health realm. Of course, my background is that. And I also married to a coach, a college coach. And so Trevor Moawad is one of the experts, and he's no longer living, but he spent about 25 years working with professional athletes. Russell Wilson is a big one, and a lot of the big five football teams. And he talks about this concept of downshifting to neutral. So early on, I was talking about our objectives is to think about the strategies that we can implement to be more emotional agile. Well, this is one of them. Downshifting to neutral. And what does that mean, downshifting to neutral? We want to be able to face the facts, ask ourselves what is in our control, and then take one small step forward. So oftentimes, what we immediately go to when we are in the midst of stress and anxiety and trauma and chaos is we go straight to the what ifs, the catastrophizing. So when we get that diagnosis, where do we go? How would this make an impact in our future? Rather than taking the small steps in front of us. So what's in our control? And what can we do with focusing on the facts? So put ourselves in position to downshift to neutral. The other thing that Dr. Susan David talks about is walking your why. So remember, she said, be present, be aware, be curious. And after you've done all those things with your emotions, you need to walk out your why, meaning what are your core values? You need to ask yourself, will my response reflect what I value? In the midst of conflict, that is one of the things that you have to ask yourself, and not what you value at that moment, but your core values that are true to you. Because a lot of us value being right at that moment. And what we need to think about is the respect that we value and the collaboration that we value. Oftentimes when I'm coaching leaders, they get overwhelmed when I ask, what are your core values? And the reality is there are a lot of honorable values out there. What I ask them to do is think about legacy. What do you want your legacy to be when you're talking about values? Do you want people to say, oh my gosh, that Mr. Thompson, he cared about people. He cared about people. Do you want them to say, Miss Johnson, she was an honest person. She gave you the truth and she did it in such a graceful way. So you were going to get the honest truth. So when you think about what kind of legacy you want to leave, you can kind of narrow down what are those core values to you. And when you're in the midst of conflict, when you're in the midst of stress and anxiety, think back, how can I walk my why? How can I respond and communicate with people that expresses my values? Oh, goodness. Look at that little fishy. Don't get hooked. Part of emotional agility, and I'd say the hardest part, is getting hooked. And if you think about a conflict you might have had with a coworker or a phone call that you had with your spouse, and you get off the phone, and what do? We start retelling the story over and over again. We even go to that audacity statement and we repeat it over and over again. You guys know what that audacity statement is. I can't believe they had the audacity to say X, Y, and Z. And we repeat it. I'm selfish. I'm selfish. And we go on and on and on. We stay in that state of being hooked rather than downshifting to neutral. So one of the things that we have to do to stop ourselves from getting hooked is just say to ourselves, listen, this is what happened. I'm focusing on the facts, and I've got to take the next step. What is the next step? What is the next step? The next step for a lot of us is participating in effective debriefing. And one of the things that we do is we get fixated on the thought, we think about it, and oftentimes I say to folks, who's in charge, the thinker or the thought? The thinker or the thought? So let's get back in charge of that. And when we do that, we have to be mindful of how much time we're sharing that one singular thought over and over again. Some of us double down and we pick up the phone and we call the person who's going to co-sign on everything that we do. That is not effective debriefing. That is the opposite. That is still staying fixated on what has happened. And so rather than doing that, calling someone that you know is going to justify your actions rather than validate your experience and the feelings around it, and then move you forward. The other thing about effective debriefing is timing. We've got to get a little bit of time for that prefrontal cortex to come back and for us to calm down our breathing, our heart rate. But we can't take too long to talk about it. It sends a message to ourselves that, oh, I guess that wasn't that important. And we don't ever get to the matter of understanding what we could have done differently, what we could have asked for help, maybe. So getting hooked is very important. We want to deter from that, but we also want to participate in effective debriefing. So who are the trusted people? Because 9 times out of 10, when we call somebody up after something happened, it's not the trusted mentor. It's not the person, the leader that can help support us in those matters. Again, it's usually someone who's going to participate in the escalation and the fixation of what has happened. So we're cruising through, and I think it's time for us to get into some breakout sessions. One thing that I want to do is have a strategy towards this, and we're going to have about 5 to 6 minutes to talk about emotional awareness, being present, being aware and being curious, downshifting to neutral, walking out your why as you consider your values, and then the next step with effective debriefing. So the strategy is this: to be focused on what we're not going to do. So strategy sometimes involves what we're not going to do. And what I don't want us to do is to talk about the scenarios that put us in a place to practice emotional agility, rather than focusing on those 4 things, which emotional agility strategy we can work on and improve on. So that's what we're going to do at this time.
Coach Massey, can I
Yes.
just ask you a question, please?
Yes, of course.
I suspect everybody on this webinar gets the downshifting to neutral because they're all high-performing people. They're all, get too many things to do, not enough time to do. But I'll bet also they're thinking about people who need to upshift to neutral because they're in low gear right now. How do you balance the need to downshift by the leader and the need to upshift by some people who are not performing at the level that we want them?
Yeah, and so when we're talking about emotional agility, we're talking about emotions. And so if someone has checked out, or if they are numb because they are exhausted and fatigued of what's going on, what we need to do to support those folks is to, again, ask them what their values are. Where do they want to walk in their why, and help support that. I know that you really care about this and being an asset and a team member in this situation, in us accomplishing this goal. So let's focus back on walking your why. We want to motivate folks to walk their why in that situation.
Thank you.
All right. You ready for breakouts?
Yes.
Okay.
We had a great discussion in our session, but if there's any volunteers to share out, we have a few minutes to do that. Something powerful that was said, an aha moment. Would anybody like to share? Or maybe what was the dominant strategy that people really needed to work on in their group or in their room?
But Jody, if you wouldn't mind, I think you have a really important national issue, which is supporting new teachers. Would you mind sharing how you're supporting new teachers?
Tammy.
Oh, Tammy, I'm sorry, I don't see very well.
Okay, let me get me unmuted. I'm not on the staff, but I'm just a support person that I have adopted a school. And I help just checking in with new teachers because they're afraid that if they say anything, it's going to go. So I'm sort of a neutral person that can let them unload some of these questions they have, or what do I do now? Or where do I go look? So it's that personal connection. It's just like the personal connection we as teachers have with the kids. If you don't build that bond, everybody doesn't function well.
What a great way to segue into the next topic of empathy. Tammy, I think you stole my show there. I mean, you are the epitome of empathy, it sounds like, for sure. The first part of the talk today was really personally, what could we do to make sure that we were available and we were present for other people, but more available to ourselves and aware of what was going on to ourselves. Now we're going to talk about relationship building through the mighty, not sentiment, but skills of empathy. And so I am going to make sure that a screen is still sharing. Is it still sharing? No, so let's do that. And we are going to talk about something that's so hot right now, empathy. And let's see here. We've shared out. So I think there's a lot of myths about empathy, and I even wrote a book about it, The Miseducation of Empathy. I think oftentimes we feel like it is ownership of other people's experience and feelings, when in fact, it is an expression of connected understanding within healthy boundaries. And so this work becomes very heavy. I had in my breakout room a school psychologist, and she said one of the things that she's really working on is not only walking her why, but including other people in walking theirs. And so we know that the work is not light. It is something that is going to be impactful when we're able to do it well, but we have to keep it within healthy boundaries. So it is not enmeshed connection where we become burnt out, but we're actually keeping ourselves in our own shoes so that we create space for people to be heard and understood, and for them to be aware and present and curious about themselves and the relationship that they have with others. And so also, it's not necessarily this innate vicarious feelings, but it is a set of relational skills that once again help establish trust and psychological safety. So before we begin, I just want to let you know that we have A through D of strategies on showing empathy in a new way, or improving our expression of empathy. Remember, this webinar was for support staff, and it is it is understood, and we recognize greatly that you guys are in unique positions of servicing students, families, parents, staff, community, every day, all day. And so that is something where empathy has to be in the forefront. So acknowledge, that's our first A, acknowledge. We have to acknowledge full humanity. And one of the things that I think we've just got to do a better job is realizing while we are witnessing behaviors and we're in the midst of conflict sometimes, that there is something underneath. Again, being curious. And we have to acknowledge that what we see is not all that's going on. There are thoughts, beliefs, and values, past experiences that are also involved in how people are reacting versus responding. So adopt a mindset that people are doing the best they can. And so I always say, hold people capable. We want to hold people capable. We want to look at folks and say, they can do it. They might not have the skills yet, but they can do it. Acknowledge what doesn't need to change about the person. I've been in plenty of situations with irate parents, and it seems to be increasing. Just the heightened emotions seem to be increasing. And the one thing that I know without a shadow of a doubt, strategy that works, is to acknowledge what doesn't need to change about the person. And so when I am face to face with a parent and they're screaming about injustices with their child, I will say to them, I know you are angry, and I know it's because you love your child and you want your child to be safe in this school. And they will look at me and I say, I know that you love your child, and I do not want you to change that about who you are. Now, we might have to change how you're expressing this because not everybody's going to hear the love that I hear right now. So let's look at this so that people can hear your heart, because that's something I don't want you to change about who you are. You love your child and you're advocating for your child. And we want that, but it's got to be in a way that we can hear you. And so that, I'm telling you right now, that downshifts a lot of times it connects people to where they're able to work with you rather than scream at you. Not all the time. But sometimes we can acknowledge and say, hey, that part we really don't want people to change, because that's clear that they love their kid and they're advocating for their kid. The other thing that we have to do, and this has been ongoing and something that we have to address, is acknowledging adult bullying behaviors, patterns, and adult bullies, period. And there's a couple articles that I've referenced, and I'm gonna tell you right now, most of the strategies involved empathy, believe it or not. But it's empathy that is clear about having rigid boundaries, having no tolerant boundaries when it comes to how you're going to be treated. But we don't have to act the way we feel. And we can always walk in our values, not theirs. And so one of the things that this article with Evans and Thompson, what they suggest is that you take it to leadership, you take it to district leadership, so that those folks who can speak for the school can intervene, set limits, and adhere to those limits. So I put that out there because I've been in the fields and I know what's out there. And I know that we have folks who have a pattern of behaviors that's rooted in intimidation and threatening behavior. And that kind of empathy is different. And we've got to be very clear about our boundaries, but also with the hope that people are capable of changing once their needs are met, whatever those needs are met. I tell kids all the time when I'm talking about bullies and bully prevention programs is that hurt people. And sometimes we have to figure out what's going on underneath. So with the A of acknowledgement, we do it with active listening. And I know all of us have heard this over and over again, but how many of us are actually trying to be intentional about practicing this? So restating what somebody has said. Oftentimes when I restate exactly what someone says, they think to themselves, I shouldn't have said that. You can see it in their eyes. Summarizing for understanding, paraphrasing. I use a lot of summarizing for teenagers because they tend to go on and on and on. With adults, one thing that I use a lot is silence, because oftentimes we are not in position where we get a chance to be heard. I use this thing called sit and sift. Is where it just reminds you at that point, okay, sit and sift, sit and sift. I'm going to allow this person to sit so that they can be present, be aware, and be curious about how they're feeling. And I'm going to sift through these heightened emotions to try to dig underneath that iceberg and see, what do they believe about the school? Do they believe that it's an unsafe place for their family? Do they believe that we do not care? What is the underneath beliefs and values and thoughts that are going on? And so I sift through the emotions and I get to what's underneath. So sit and sift. Of course, ask reflective questions, nod and track the speaker. I got that from an acronym that we use with students called SLANT, when we try to get them to active listen. And I've used it in staff meetings too. Can I get SLANT, please? And that means sit up, lean in, ask questions, nod, and track the speaker. So that's SLANT. And the other thing is observing body language. And I think sometimes that is so underrated. If we watch people, we'll know where to meet them at. We'll be able to know, how much listening that needs to take place. So the examples on the right, what I've done in the past is I've typed these up and we put them next to the phones. So our front desk personnel, because a lot of times they pick up the phone. People get real courageous when they don't meet you face to face and they say things that they would not say in front of you. And so oftentimes our front desk personnel, secretaries, they have it right there by the phone and they use those statements. I had one secretary say to me, I really like it, but I don't like all the hugs I'm getting now from parents, but it has shifted the culture in the front office, as kids are coming out, and all the hecticness of dismissal and things like that for the secretary. So those are active listening techniques. So B, building trust quickly. So I have a picture of my 15-year-old daughter here running track. She's an all-star. But there's some irony to this picture because although she's quick, building trust with her is not so quick. We know how teenagers are. And some of the things that we have to hold on to is making sure that we are intentionally, actively listening with clear, evident respect. The open body language is huge. I don't know how many times I see throughout the school buildings, people continuing to work, like look up for a second and then go back down. And so they're not even giving any type of eye contact and open body language. Some people have their arms crossed and it just screams that there is no trust there, that there is some type of barrier there. And so right now, as we speak, there's probably someone typing away because they have so much work to get done and they're supposed to be servicing our families and the families are coming up and they're giving minimal eye contact. The running joke in my office as a school counselor, when teachers would come in, they would say, "Are you busy?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm busy." Well, what I meant was, do you have a few minutes for me to share or for us to talk this out? And I would say to them, yes, but I don't know how much eye contact I can give you right now. And in about 5 or 6 minutes, I might have to go back to scheduling this child. But maybe later on during your lunch or something like that. But if you want to talk now, that's fine. So I'm letting you know that I'm interested, but there might be a case where I can't provide the open body language. Integrity is the cornerstone of trust. And what I have found is that the reputation of integrity sometimes will build trust so fast that before the person even meets that person, they've already established some trust. And so understand that what we do on a daily basis can build the reputation of integrity and will go a long way. So, I heard that that principal was someone who could really be dependable and is a man of integrity or woman of integrity. Before they even walk in the door, there is some trust being built. I used to have dismissal after school. It was the funnest thing of my day, like the best thing of telling kids who didn't want to be in school to go home, go home, go home. And especially in the Midwest where it's snowing, and everybody wants to throw snowballs, it's like, go home. But one of the things that I made sure I did, because it's like a building of 600 kids with one school counselor, is I tried to do as much connecting with the students as possible and with the parents. So what are you cooking for dinner tonight? I would ask the parents. I would ask the student. I saw you in the office this morning with a referral. I hope the end of your day went well. Did you finish out the day strong? I'm having 1 minute, 2 minute conversations and talking to parents, developing relationship. I remember on one encounter I had the infamous parent come in, and she was always very upset about all the things. And she was screaming and hollering. I come out of my office and I go to the office area, and she looks directly at me and she goes, "Not you, Miss Massey. You know how to talk to kids. You respect my kids. I see you outside all the time. I'm talking about everybody else." And it's like, I've built trust. And so I was able to say to her, well, it can't be everybody else. I know I have coworkers that really love and treat kids with respect. But immediately, I had never said anything to her, but it was just this built up integrity and respect based on what we do on a daily basis. So that can help build trust. Also, clear and timely communication. And I love what Dr. Reese says in Fearless Schools. He says, fear is the thief of trust. And so fear-based culture never breeds trust in psychological safety. So empathy also involves being curious. We're saying this over and over again, curious versus fearless. So how do we do that? How do we do that when I'm not such a feely person, but I want to make a connection with someone who's quite upset? Or what that person has done has got me very heightened. And now I'm here and I'm supposed to establish some kind of connection. And I have not downshifted to neutral just yet. My suggestion to you is to bypass, not ignore, but just bypass how you feel in order to investigate under that iceberg. So that sift and validating. And validation, my friends, is not acceptance, it's not approval, and it is not ownership. So oftentimes I think people feel like if I validate what they're doing and I show some validation, that means I own their behavior. And that's not true. Validation is acknowledging the full humanity of folks. It's acknowledging that their prefrontal cortex is not in control and integrating with the amygdala right now. So we are acknowledging that you are angry, and based on your thoughts and beliefs, I understand why you might be angry. When we establish that validation, we can then challenge people's thoughts very easily once people are able to hear us. Validation can lead to good challenging of false beliefs and just unrealistic expectations. Learning versus persuading. So empathy is about learning. And we're asking those questions. I wonder if, can we both decide on? And we're doing it with receptive language. And so in my book, I talk about archetypes or expressions of empathy. And we can be heated blankets to the point, my husband's a heated blanket, where when someone is upset, we get upset too. So we've taken on their emotions, and now we are persuading them to react the same way we would. If I was in your shoes, I would do this. And so we've taken on those emotions rather than sit and sift. Then we have the fixer-upper, and that's not learning. That's just trying to fix it. We have this dismissing that happens versus learning, and that's the operator. So how may I direct your call? Right? Maybe you should talk to HR or employee assistance about that, rather than just listening and learning about the person. And then we have the cheerleaders who are so skilled at minimization. And they let us know right away that, it's not that serious, it's not all that bad. At least it's not, at least it's not this. And what it does is it makes us and invalidates our response. That's what minimization does. And so we want to make sure that we're staying neutral, that we're not overly positive, and that we are learning in the process. So now we're at D. So we talked about downshifting for ourselves. Well, how do we downshift others? Well, we do that through de-escalation strategies. So giving personal space, removing an audience, offering a solution, ignoring the behavior if it's minor, and then once again, focusing on the facts and the incremental gains and small wins. I tell my teachers who are definitely working with difficult parents, a crisis is a terrible time to teach a lesson. So you are faced with heightened emotions. Don't start talking about, what they should be doing at home with their child as far as homework, the child being here on time. That is a terrible time. We have to get them down. We have to get that lid down so that we can speak to their prefrontal cortex. For example, when coaching, I'm so glad that Dr. Reeves called me coach, because now I can give coaching examples. In situations where my players are heightened and they're frantic because they're in chaos with a swarming defense and they're turning the ball over and over and over again, I call a timeout, because that's the time to de-escalate my players. And a full timeout. They come and they sit down on the bench. You get a drink, take a breath, breathe. Okay, let's focus on the facts. What's the score? Listen, we still have time. You guys are making decisions, and it is your emotions making decisions. It is not your thinking brain. And so let's figure this out. That is the de-escalation process. And as you notice, it's like removing them from the court, giving personal space, removing them, and then getting back in front of the audience. That's what we do with individuals on a day-to-day basis, providing direct service when everybody is not happy-go-lucky, right? So that's how we can de-escalate. Now, debriefing, we talked about this as far as individuals initiating effective debriefing, meaning let's not call the cosigner who's going to escalate us and keep us fixated and keep us hooked, but let's go after some time. We calm down and kind of been aware and curious about what has happened. Let's now reach out to someone who's supportive, that make a difference moving forward, who's trusted. On the other end, when we are trying to debrief others and seeking out others to participate in this debriefing, we have to give them time. Now, in the basketball scenario, we just do a little bit of debriefing after the game, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, because we want the players to go home, think about it, and then the next day, debriefing happens in our film session. And so we start talking about, what was done wrong, what was done right, what led up to all of these turnovers, how were you feeling? What could you guys have done differently in order to support each other? In the most psychological safe space will allow folks to initiate what they've done or what they can do. So I know I'm a great coach when I am in film session and my players are saying, and they're pointing out, stop the film, coach, stop. Right there, I probably should have stepped to my pass. That's on me, my bad. That turnover was my fault. And then another player would step up and be like, no, actually, I should have read the defense better than that, and ball fake. And so you have this collective group of people debriefing and talking about as a team. And because it's a psychological safe space, they're saying, I made a mistake. And sometimes they're saying, listen, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea what I'm doing on that play. Can you share that with me again? That's the place we want to get at when we're talking with our staff and interacting in our workplaces. E is the last one, eliminate escalation. And so taking the bait, we've got to know what our triggers are. If you don't know, go to your senses. What did I hear? What did I say? Or what was said? Am I smelling something? You know, was I touched? That's what we tell our children. Think about your five senses. And so don't take the bait. You know, and oftentimes staff and parents and leaders, they will throw that out there. They will say, you know, what if this happened to you? What you want to try to do is keep the focus on them. So you volley back. There was a time where a parent, and this happens unfortunately too often, we put the son on the wrong bus. And that's very scary. And the parent came in very frantic, and was all upset, and it was cussing and carrying on. And she looked at the secretary and she said, "How would you feel if your son was put on the wrong bus?" And at that time, the secretary answered the question with all her might, and she said, "I would be a hot mess." And it just blew up from there, right? And in those situations, we want to try to stay neutral and we want to volley back. So we might say, "I understand." I mean, just completely not answer that question and say, "I understand. I can see that you are angry and probably afraid, but let's spend this time trying to figure out a solution and get your son to you." Or you can say, "I don't even want to talk about me right now. This is all about you. All of our energy and time need to be focused on you and getting your son back." That's an example of volleying back. The other thing that we have to do in order to eliminate or avoid escalation is not doing the minimization. I'm telling you, that's the thief of validation, and it is a fire starter to escalation. So when you're saying it's not that big of a deal, think about a time in your career when you were really upset and someone minimized it and said, "You're overreacting. It's not that big of a deal." I mean, it took you from zero. It's not very nice. It's not a psychological safe space because now you can't be true to how you feel. And so the other thing we want to look at is tone and volume. I worked in a psychiatric unit in the summertime, and I had a mentor there. She was an older lady, and she would say, "You have a naturally loud voice, and I want to make sure that you stay safe." And she said, "Just start to whisper when they start to scream." And I thought, this is not going to work. And sure enough, most of the patients there needed stuff from us. They wanted something from us. And that meant that they were interested in what we had to say. And so if I was whispering, they couldn't hear me while they were screaming. And so what that did, they would stop mid-sentence while they're screaming to hear what I had to say. And so tone and volume works wonders in eliminating escalation and de-escalating folks. Needing to have the last word. I worked in elementary schools, I worked in middle schools, I worked at the college level, I worked with all kinds of young adults and children. I have seen this more with adults and staff needing to have the last word. And it is something that we have to go back to walking our why, because clearly our core value is not getting the last word. And it is just something that oftentimes I'm just embarrassed about. And I know it's just the emotions that are taking over. And we want power and control at that moment over something that is insignificant. So needing to have the last word. A lot of times I just bow out of an argument with a staff or a parent. I just start to be quiet, and then they have less to say. And then interrupting or rushing the speaker. That tends to escalate folks for sure. So we are cruising. We do have about 4 minutes left. And I want to maybe table this breakout session. So, because I'd like to get some conversation going. And I just don't know if we can do justice to this. But in this, I had a scenario where you guys would pick out the entry points of when we can establish trust with people through validation or acknowledgement. There were some different statements in there that were clearly evidence of escalating language. And then that was it. And then the rest of the next part of that was for you to then talk about what active listening strategies you would use to further the conversation and to de-escalate the conversation and move it forward. So I can send out, and I think we will send out, we can send out the scenario if people want to use that and go forth. But in the last minutes or so, maybe we can have some conversation about the empathy strategies or maybe some pain points in establishing empathy.
I know we're almost out of time, but I did want to ask you a question, Coach Massey. And that is, empathy is a really hard idea for teachers. And that is, how do you balance being empathetic with students, particularly students who have been traditionally underrepresented in academic achievement, but not have that leap into lower expectations? How do you balance those two?
Yeah, I think what you do is you have to acknowledge that some of our students might not have the motivation or the support that we have. And so we have to look at not only their behaviors, the unmotivation, but be curious about what's underneath. That is a part of an empathy expression, is asking people what's going on and figuring out, what do you believe about this? What do you believe you are capable of doing? And what truths do you have about yourself? And what have you heard other people tell you about yourself? And what do you believe and what do you think is not true? And so establishing that kind of relationship, we all know that relationships are key, but we're building the trust and psychological safety so that that kid can move forward and say, okay, this person cares about me because they're interested in who I am and what I think about myself. And so, that's the other thing. And with teachers, I always tell them, listen, emotions are data, not direction towards action. It's data. It's not direction towards action. And so that means we have to take a time to analyze the data, analyze the emotions so that we can make an informed decision on how we are going to teach that child and how are we going to motivate that child.
Well, very well said. And this hour has just flown by. And I just want to really appreciate, Coach Massey, the insight and the experience that you've brought to the table. I hope we'll do this again and continue these conversations. Lisa, who is the president of Creative Leadership Solutions, do you have anything else to say?
I wanted to thank Janelle as well for her preparation and thoughtfulness in going into this, for support staff, and the video, the recording, as well as the supporting documents that I dropped into the chat will be sent out tomorrow to all the registered participants. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.